Naughty Dog as a whole seems to be a tad bit directionless at the moment. A notable studio for their world-defining games with above industry standard stories, characters, action, and presentation. One that played a huge role in defining Sony exclusives and selling consoles all over the world. This group of people certainly wasn't afraid of subverting expectations and taking steep risks that would rightfully disappoint and, well, in the worst case, as we've seen, make their loyal fans very, very angry. I know a lot of people took personal issue with the directions Part 2 story went in, but you can't say that they lack creative integrity or that they are willing to compromise their artistic visions for their games because of what others may think. This is something that I commend them greatly for, and it's part of the reason why I respect them so much as a creative body. But the respect has been wilting away in the years following Part 2's release because of the Naughty Dog drawback. Now, I'm what you may call a Naughty Dog fanboy, quote, end quote. Since we are so keen on labeling everything these days, I played through the original Last of Us at a buddy's house, ended up loving it so much that I went out and got the remaster that launched a year after its initial release because it launched on a console that was soon to be phased out, being the PS3. Part 2 came along in 2020, and to no one's surprise, I booked time off work just to be able to play it on release day in pure anticipation. The story had angered me, so much so that I had to take a day or two to just get my bearings, but over time I grew to love it more than the original. With trailers for the show propping up online, Naughty Dog announced their remake of Part 1 that would launch just a few months before the show for the definitive experience. The same year, Part 2 would get a free PS5 update that capped the frame rate at 60, which was an upgrade from the original 30. And now, to start off the new year of 2024, we have a paid remaster of Part 2. You probably see where I'm going with all this. This all happened in just the span of 12 years, and to put it into perspective, Resident Evil 4's remake was of a game that had no updates but a port over into modern consoles in almost the 20 years since its launch. And yes, I bought into all of them because of how much I love these games, but I'm not biased or blind. Some of this was a path carved out by greed and quick ways to make money on the side. Realistically, from a business standpoint, it makes sense to have small projects on the side to keep revenue coming in during long lull periods that have pretty much been made obsolete by today's ever-growing live service models. AAA games of Naughty Dog's caliber now take 3/4 of a decade to put together and hundreds of millions of dollars spent just to see the light of day. GTA Online is the sole reason why Rockstar can take as long as they want to release their next game because they consistently profit off of their online empire every day. But Naughty Dog as a studio doesn't really have any backup like this, and it was probably one of the driving forces behind their so-called ambitious online shooter that has since, well, been cancelled, which rightfully led to a lot of uproar in the community because people have been waiting in anticipation since 2013's Faction Game Mode to get another online Last of Us mode. What makes this news more shocking is that it's rumored to have been partly Bungie's fault for the cancellation and layoffs of some of the studio staff. Bungie was reportedly brought in to evaluate what Naughty Dog had worked on thus far to see if there was any potential in their upcoming shooter. Bungie supposedly reported to Sony that nothing they saw was worthwhile, prompting Sony to massively scale back the project. If this is true, I find it very ironic that a studio like Bungie of all studios had a say in another company's shooter title when they can barely keep theirs afloat with how poorly they price gouge their fans. It's obvious that Sony initially bought Bungie because they managed to build a successful live service monopoly that Sony could profit off of. And now that they own them, I would be shocked if they weren't meeting with them and using them to see how they can incorporate more live service models into their future titles and their studios. I mean, come on, would anyone really be surprised if Sony wanted a full live service experience with The Last of Us Online and Naughty Dog didn't really want to do it? It's impossible to say, but that's just what I think. Nevertheless, with the cancellation of their super ambitious game, people are left kind of wondering what's next. The studio has assured that they're still at work on more single-player driven games, one being a new IP, and one presumably being a third entry in the Last of Us universe, but they're a long way off. The thing is, the studio had allocated staff, resources, and a lot of time to be able to put out those remasters and the one remake, which honestly could have been better spent somewhere else because when you think about it, they really only appeal to a slim demographic of gamers. The select few that have never played the prior releases and the people like me who are offensively massive fans of their creations. But they doubled down on The Last of Us Part 1 remake because they wanted a fresh coat of paint on their best-selling title to be able to launch it amidst the roller coaster of hype they stirred up with their upcoming release of the HBO series. Rightfully so, because it was a smart thing to do. The show did affect the sales numbers, seeing some decent revenue back on their investment upon launch and again when the show aired. It was the 5th best-selling game of September 2022 and was the 3rd most downloaded game of the month in Europe and North America, so yeah, it did end up doing quite well. But calling it a remake was kind of a farce because they didn't go in and change or rework sections that previously didn't work like Dead Space did. They improved the combat slightly, and they improved the exploration, they added the AI from Part 2, and they did a ground-up recreation of the environments. So it wasn't lazy, they didn't skimp on their fair share of work, but many would argue, myself included, that their asking price for a game that retreads the same exact ground was egregious. And honestly a slap in the face to everyone who had bought the previous 2 versions of the game and chose to support them. It didn't add any new substantial content either. A few skins for Joel and Ellie, a speedrun mode, and a permadeath mode. Not really much there to warrant a purchase if you were already well versed in the story beats. You'd think that the remake would have attempted to implement their newer improvements to the gameplay formula, which took the shape of a dodging ability and the ability to go prone in long grass and hide under environmental objects, but they didn't even try to incorporate them. I can't apply a new coat of paint to an old Mazda, tune the alignment, slap a fan on the dashboard with a piece of tape that says AC, and then try to list it on the market at full price. That's just not how it works, but that's exactly what they did with the remake, and that's coming from someone who bought it and enjoyed it. There was no upgrade fee for those that had the previous remaster, and if you wanted it, you had to pay full price. It didn't help that the team chose to release the PC version in an unplayable state instead of delaying it. It took months to get it into working order, although the people of Reddit say it's still relatively a poor optimized port. Now, the improved visuals and new facial animations did set a tone that wasn't there before and helped bring emotion to the forefront that was previously lacking just due to the limitations of the time it released. There is new depth to the combat and extra grit. The small details from Part 2 are here as well, but for full price, what sets the remaster for Part 2 apart from their previous money-seeking endeavors is that it launched with an upgrade fee instead of having to pay the full amount for the release if you already own it. The upgrade fee totaled to $15 Canadian for me, which is a huge savings from the $70 asking price for the retail version. And honestly, if you're someone who has never played it before, the smart thing to do would be to go out and find a physical copy of the PS4 version for dirt cheap and then simply pay for the upgrade. You could easily save $20 for an experience that has been expanded upon with content that will last you for hours. They also added onto their already impressive roster of accessibility features, which makes them one of the leading studios to put this much effort into ensuring almost everyone can enjoy their products. I do think that the new asking price is still a little too high. I think it should be rightfully sitting around the $40 mark for what is essentially a few small implementations and an in-depth game mode, but still, I've sunk 10 hours into The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered without ever touching the emotionally draining main narrative. No Return is the star of this remaster, so we'll start off talking with that. A roguelike mode that I have been addicted to since its release. I can easily see getting 20 hours of playtime out of this mode alone. I know that these kind of randomized modes aren't for everyone, but it has a staggering amount of depth. I was pretty firm in my stance that the mode would be nothing more than a lazy addition to make their asking price seem worth it prior to launch, but here I am 10 hours in and I'm still unlocking new stages, characters, skins, and gameplay modifiers. Its foundation is built around the player having a constant bar to chase, whether you're chasing challenges to unlock a character you really want, trying to defeat that boss so you can unlock the next one, or just pushing your luck by going into a run on Grounded. The cycle of being rewarded works incredibly well with the average duration of a single run. These staggered encounters respect the player's time by having quick sessions that typically last anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes. That's if you manage to actually complete them and defeat the boss at the end of the journey. I've only beaten a handful of runs because it's incredibly challenging, and that's coming from someone who is an avid Last of Us player with experience in beating the games on hard. Some of these challenges you get in the game can severely decrease your chances of survival. Did somebody say invisible enemies? Yeah. That's brutal. It changes up the slower nature of the game's pacing, opting to create scenarios that allow you to go more balls to the wall that puts their gore system on full display. It's a great change of pace. The ability to come home, sit on the couch, and just plug away at a few runs without having the pressure to go to the next chapter in the story is awesome. It's there for the pure objective of allowing players to have fun, acting as much needed brevity, especially if you were actively making your way through the game's lengthy story. It introduces player agency by giving you the ability to shape your runs with alternating paths, upgrades, and crafting recipes. Each run has 2 paths you can choose from. Selecting one will subsequently lock the other one off, forcing you down a path set solely by you. Each run contains unique challenges, random enemy factions, and modifiers that may or may not work against you. Having dynamite that draws from fallen enemies is something to be wary about if you're playing a melee-focused character like Abby, but if you're smart, you can use this to your advantage by using a well-placed shot to take down a guy standing by a few buddies, saving time and ammo. Molotovs that sporadically fall from the sky can end up making Joel barbecue, but if you're lucky, just one will burst over the head of an assailant, sparking them up like the 4th of July. I've yet to unlock all of them, but having invisible enemies combined with a noir filter and a mirrored view of the world is incredibly difficult, especially if you are playing as a character that can't dodge. They included the wide cast of characters found in the story as playable models in No Return, but I'll admit that sometimes their animations can look absolutely ridiculous because they don't have their own animations and instead are using Ellie and Abby's animations. That's why Joel runs like Abby, and I just can't unsee it. It looked so odd. Regardless of that slight laugh, each of the 10 characters have their own playstyles that suit them in tandem with their own weapons, upgrade paths, buffs, and some have weaknesses. Only about 3 of the 10 characters have drawbacks to their playstyle. Nell gets a speed boost from healing and has a whole tree on healing, crafting, and stats because she's a medic. Abby has perks that encourage a more risky and brutal approach to combat because she gains health for every melee kill she gets. Jesse is the guy you want to go to if you're anything like me and you like doing stuff quietly. He starts out with a silencer and has the crafting recipe from the get-go to make more. Both Joel and Tommy start with fully kitted out guns, but neither of them can dodge, and that's why I'm not a huge fan of playing as them, unfortunately. Does it create a challenge? Yeah, but dodging is also a fundamental part of the combat, and combating the infected without it sucks. You can't dodge their grab attacks, and one grab with a clicker rushing at you spells game over. Having a modifier that disables dodge for a round, that I can get behind. Having to do whole runs without it is not fun. All of these runs have 4 game modes that are randomly selected: Assault, Capture, Hunted Mode, and Holdout. Assault is basically a 3-wave mode where enemies will spawn with varying degrees of awareness. Sometimes they'll know where you are and sometimes they won't. Capture puts you in a map with a safe that you have to get to before the time expires, but the thing is, it's also guarded by enemies. Hunted mode is exactly what it sounds like. You're hunted by enemies for a certain time limit and you have to try to survive. Holdout is a horde wave based mode where you're stuck in a small location and you have to combat several enemies to make it out alive. And to add on to all of that, there are also daily runs that unlock every 24 hours, and you can only attempt to do these once and everybody will get the same randomized encounter. Lastly is the custom run, where you can go in and you can change just about everything you want about that run, including enemies, weapons, filters, and gameplay modifiers. All of this was my way of breaking down the mode to essentially tell you that if you like the encounters in the base game, you're gonna love this mode. This alone is worth the upgrade. But the good stuff doesn't end there, because there are additional extras: a guitar free play mode, a speedrun mode, haptic feedback features, lost levels, and an upcoming documentary of the making of feature that is launching this week. That's certainly a hell of a lot more than the remake got. What the hell, Naughty Dog? The guitar free play is on another level, probably the first accurate display of being able to play guitar in a video game form. The hand placements and how you need to strum the touchpad on the controller to hit every string is both impressive and frustrating. You know, this is actually kind of cool.
3 hours later.
Oh, why is this so hard? I'm just like a bad doctor. I have zero patience for this sort of thing, but the detail fascinates me. And if you're a musician with any knowledge of guitars, I'd love to hear from you in the comments if you can actually play these in-game assets using your expertise. For a mode that is literally only about playing stringed instruments, there's different models, characters, and backgrounds to play with, plus a filter mode for cinematic visual flair. This is not something I ever thought I'd see in a game, but I'm glad it's here, especially because all of the instruments you can pick from sound different. I'm not really going to go super in depth with the haptic feedback mode because I feel like just everyone kind of knows about it here, and honestly, I'm someone that can take it or leave it as a feature. I don't personally feel like it enhances the experience so much that I wish to drain my battery quicker than it already does. Don't get me wrong, it's good with minute but precise rumblings when working on the weapon bench or the resistance on the triggers when pulling the bowstring back, but I don't think it's really going to blow anyone away. Lastly are the never before seen lost levels that offer an interesting insight into the world of game creation. These levels can be played both with and without commentary, but you really want to experience them with commentary so you can understand the context of what they represented in the story and why they were cut in favor of other scenes. It does a great job showing just how much meticulous thought goes into even the smallest of details that we as the people experiencing their creations would never ever pick up on. There is a very systematic approach to game development that has layers upon layers of work and thought that goes into everything you see. All three of these will run you at most 10 minutes because there is hardly anything to them. There are unfinished models, placeholder assets, unrecorded dialogue scenes with unrefined animations, which helps show what the games look like before they launch with the visuals we see. It's a really interesting concept to have these inclusions be a part of the game. Hearing devs discuss how they shape the layout of a level to intentionally get players to look towards the right way to progress is genius. Crafting environments and navigation around the reward center of the brain by having positive reinforcements by creating short-term obstacles and goals for the player is something you would never really think about, which is why I believe this content is so important. The real shame is that after you jog through these levels, there is never a reason to return to them. And then we have the documentary, which isn't even out yet, but it still falls into the same realm as the lost levels. If you're into that type of content, you're gonna enjoy it, but let's be honest, most people don't care about how their video games are made, they just want to turn on their console of choice and play a fun game. Much like I don't care about how my McDonald's cheeseburger is made, even though I should, I just want a subpar burger to satisfy my hunger. Some people are going to feel like the ingredients don't total a price that respects what it is offering, which is valid if you feel that way. But then I retort with you can spend $25 on a skin you can't see in Modern Warfare 3, or you can pay $15 for hours of fun and content that explores the creation side of the industry from the lens of professionals. And then you also get slightly improved visuals and ray tracing, which looked phenomenal. For me, it's worth it, and I wanted to talk about it because I love The Last of Us, and if I could marry it, I probably would. So if you want to see me marry a digital game or you like the content, consider gently pressing or smashing that sub button because there is always more content on the way. Good night and good lunch.